You won't want to miss this. Before we jump in, hit subscribe, like this video, and drop a comment. Trust me, you'll be glad you did. Jack Harper's head throbbed as if someone were rhythmically beating a drum inside his skull. The unmistakable after-effects of cheap tequila and even cheaper decisions clung to him like an unwanted second skin. Groaning, he tried to roll over, expecting the familiar creak of his sagging couch and the metallic whine of his Arizona trailer's floor. Instead, his hand pressed against something cold and unyielding. The chill seeped into his palm, startling him awake. His eyes flew open, and he found himself staring at a polished metal floor that gleamed faintly in soft blue light. His heart jumped, and he scrambled into a sitting position, scanning his surroundings. This wasn't his trailer. "What the hell?" he muttered, the words catching in his dry throat. The room he was in was circular, the walls rising in smooth arcs that seemed to defy conventional architecture. Blue light emanated from recessed panels in the ceiling, casting the space in an ethereal glow. Strange, flickering consoles lined the walls, their displays filled with symbols Jack couldn't recognize. The air was sharp and clean, too clean, like it had been scrubbed of every impurity. The metallic tang of it hit Jack's tongue, and he coughed, the sound echoing in the otherwise silent chamber. He pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly as dizziness threatened to topple him back over. His head throbbed harder now, as if punishing him for moving too quickly. "This has to be a dream," he said aloud, his voice sounding small in the cavernous space. "A tequila-fueled nightmare." But as he reached out to steady himself against one of the consoles, the sensation of the cold metal under his fingertips felt unnervingly real. Too real. Jack pinched his arm. Hard. Pain flared, sharp and unmistakable. "Not dreaming," he whispered, panic rising in his chest. "Oh God, not dreaming." He spun in a slow circle, trying to make sense of where he was. The curved walls reminded him of something out of a sci-fi movie, but the craftsmanship was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Every surface seemed alive, subtly shifting and pulsing as if the room itself were breathing. Then his eyes landed on a massive viewport that dominated one side of the room. His breath caught in his throat as he staggered toward it. Beyond the transparent panel stretched an infinite black void speckled with distant stars. "No," Jack murmured, shaking his head. This can't be real." He pressed his hand against the viewport, his palm leaving a faint print on the glass. His reflection stared back at him, pale and disheveled, his brown hair sticking up in every direction and dark circles smudging the skin beneath his eyes. But beyond his reflection, the view remained unchanged. Stars. Space. "I'm not in Arizona anymore," he said to himself, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. As if to answer his confusion, one of the consoles behind him beeped. Jack whirled around, his heart pounding in his chest. A display lit up, the alien symbols rearranging themselves in a flurry of motion. He took a hesitant step closer, his pulse roaring in his ears. The symbols resolved into English text. "Welcome, Captain." Jack blinked. "Captain?" he said aloud. "Captain of what?" Before he could even begin to process the absurdity of the situation, the air around him shifted. A faint hiss echoed through the chamber, and Jack's head snapped toward the source of the sound. A section of the curved wall slid open, revealing a doorway that led to a softly lit corridor beyond. Jack's instincts screamed at him to back away, to find some corner to hide in. But his feet were rooted to the spot as 5 figures emerged from the corridor. At first, Jack thought they were human. They were tall, slender, and moved with an elegance that seemed almost otherworldly. But as they stepped into the light, the details became clearer, and Jack's jaw dropped. Their skin was lavender, smooth and flawless, with a faint iridescent sheen that caught the room's blue glow. Their hair ranged in metallic hues, silver, bronze, deep purple, falling in cascading waves down their backs. Their eyes were the most striking feature, large and luminous, with vertical pupils like a cat's. Jack's breath hitched as the 5 women lined up before him, their movements eerily synchronized. Each wore a sleek, form-fitting uniform made of some shimmering material that hugged their bodies like liquid. It was hard to tell where the fabric ended and their skin began. The tallest of them stepped forward. Her silver hair fell to her waist, and her eyes, a piercing shade of gold, fixed on Jack with an intensity that made him feel like prey. When she smiled, he noticed faintly pointed canines glinting in the light. "Greetings, Captain," she said, her voice melodic but layered with an otherworldly resonance. Jack opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He closed it again, swallowing hard before finally managing, "Hi." The woman tilted her head slightly, her expression both curious and amused. "You are our new commander," she said, her tone making it sound like an absolute fact. "There's been a mistake," Jack blurted, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm not a captain. He hesitated, trying to sum up his less-than-impressive reality. "I'm just some guy." The woman's golden eyes seemed to bore into him. "You purchased command of this station, did you not?" Jack's mind raced. The morning came flooding back to him in disjointed fragments. The tequila, the Craigslist post, the joke purchase. His stomach sank. "Oh no," he muttered. "That was real." The woman's expression didn't change. "The transaction was valid. You are now the rightful commander of this station." Jack laughed, the sound high-pitched and tinged with hysteria. No. I bought this thing for $1. It was supposed to be a scam." The woman remained unfazed. "The station's protocols have recognized you as its captain. The cost is irrelevant." Jack stared at her, his mind reeling. "You're telling me I accidentally bought a space station?" "That is correct," she said, her tone as calm as if she were discussing the weather. The absurdity of it all hit Jack like a freight train. He pressed the heels of his hands against his temples, muttering under his breath. "This is a dream. It has to be a dream. Or I've finally lost it." "Your mental stability is within acceptable parameters," another of the women said, stepping forward. She was slightly shorter than the leader, her bronze hair braided into an intricate pattern. Her voice was soft but carried a hint of amusement. "Great," Jack said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Glad to know I'm sane while hallucinating 5 purple alien women." The leader's lips twitched, as if suppressing a smile. "I am Lyra," she said, placing a hand on her chest. "First assistant to the captain. These are Vega, Cassie, Era, and Nova. We are your crew." Jack blinked at them, his brain struggling to keep up. "Crew? What crew? I don't have a crew." "You do now," Lyra said simply. Jack took a shaky step back, his mind screaming at him to wake up. But the cold floor beneath his feet, the hum of the station's systems, and the intensity of the women's gazes all pointed to one inescapable truth. This was real. He glanced at the viewport again, at the endless void beyond. Earth was gone. Arizona was gone. His miserable, dead-end life was gone. "Happy freaking birthday to me," he muttered. "Captain," Lyra said, her tone soft but commanding. "You have inherited not just this station, but its purpose. We are here to guide you. Together, we can unlock its full potential." Jack looked at her, then at the rest of the women, their expressions expectant. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. He was just a nobody, a screw-up with no future. How the hell was he supposed to command a space station? "I think there's been a mistake," he said again, though his voice lacked conviction this time. "There is no mistake," Lyra said firmly. "You are the captain now." And for the first time in Jack's life, someone said those words with absolute certainty. Jack Harper had no idea how to process the situation he'd stumbled, or perhaps been dragged, into. The revelation that he was now the captain of an alien space station still hadn't fully sunk in. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to wake up, to escape this surreal nightmare. But the cold floor beneath his feet, the faint hum of machinery that vibrated through his body, and the 5 alien women who stood before him made one thing painfully clear. This was real. Lyra, the silver-haired leader of the crew, had calmly declared him their commander. The others, Vega, Cassie, Era, and Nova, seemed equally convinced. They flanked him now, moving in perfect synchronization as they led him down a softly glowing corridor. The walls pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat, as if the station itself were alive. Jack couldn't help but run his fingers along the walls as they walked. The surface was smooth and cool, but it seemed to ripple faintly under his touch. "What is this?" he asked, trying to focus on anything but the growing panic bubbling in his chest. "The station is partially organic," Era, the engineering specialist, explained. Her voice was soft but carried an edge of authority. "The Arcturians constructed it to evolve and adapt over time. Its systems are self-repairing and responsive to the needs of its captain." Jack stopped in his tracks, pulling his hand away from the wall as if it had burned him. "Organic? Like alive?" "In a manner of speaking," Lyra said, turning to face him. Her golden eyes seemed to glow faintly in the corridor's light. "The station is a symbiotic entity. It requires a captain to function at full capacity. Without one, its systems degrade." Jack frowned, crossing his arms over his chest. "And how long has this place been without a captain?" "Approximately 3 centuries, Vega, the protocol specialist, supplied." She stepped forward, her bronze hair catching the light as she gestured down the corridor. "The station has been in a dormant state, awaiting a new commander. When you completed the transaction, its protocols reactivated." "Right," Jack said, his tone dripping with disbelief. "Because clicking buy now on a Craigslist scam makes me qualified to run a 3,000-year-old alien spaceship." Lyra's lips twitched, the faintest hint of amusement breaking through her otherwise serene expression. "The station chose you, Captain. Your neural signature was compatible with its systems." Jack threw up his hands. "You keep saying that like it's supposed to mean something to me. Neural signature? Symbiotic systems? I don't even know how to work a microwave without messing it up." The crew exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Lyra stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. "You are more capable than you realize, Jack Harper. The station recognizes potential in you, even if you do not see it in yourself." Jack opened his mouth to argue, but something in her gaze stopped him. There was no doubt, no hesitation in her words. It was the kind of unwavering confidence he'd never encountered before, especially not in himself. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Fine. Let's say I believe you. What exactly does being captain mean? What do you expect me to do?" "The captain is the heart of the station," Lyra said, gesturing for him to follow as they resumed walking. "Your commands direct its operations. Your decisions determine its future. And your synchronization with its systems unlocks its full potential." "Synchronization," Jack repeated, the word tasting strange in his mouth. "You mentioned that before. What does that actually mean?" "It begins with physical connection," Era explained, her voice taking on a slightly clinical tone. "Touch allows the station to attune itself to your neural patterns. From there, deeper synchronization is achieved through mental and emotional alignment." Jack blinked. "You're talking about telepathy, aren't you?" "In a sense," Vega said, "though it is not purely mental. The station's systems are designed to harmonize with the captain's entire being, mind, body, and spirit." "That sounds invasive," Jack muttered. "It is deeply personal," Lyra admitted, her gaze unwavering. "But it is also necessary. Without synchronization, the station cannot function properly. And without a captain, it will eventually collapse." Jack stopped again, turning to face the crew. "What happens if I say no? If I refuse to play along with this whole captain thing?" The crew exchanged another series of silent glances, their expressions darkening slightly. It was Nova, the security coordinator, who answered. "If you refuse, the station will deactivate its systems and return to dormancy. Over time, it will deteriorate and be lost forever." Jack frowned. "So it's me or nothing?" "Correct," Vega said. Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling to the surface. "This is insane. I didn't sign up for this. I just wanted to get through another crappy day on Earth. Not whatever this is." Lyra stepped closer, her expression softening. "You may not have chosen this, Jack Harper, but the station chose you. And whether you believe it or not, you have the potential to be a great captain. Jack stared at her, searching for any hint of deception in her words. But there was none. She believed in him, even if he didn't believe in himself. He sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping. Fine. I'll try. But no promises. Okay? If I screw this up, it's on you for picking me. Lyra's smile returned, small but genuine. That is all we ask, Captain. The corridor opened into a massive chamber that took Jack's breath away. The walls curved upward, meeting in a domed ceiling that glowed with faint, swirling light. In the center of the room was a raised platform surrounded by holographic displays, each one flickering with alien symbols. This is the command center, Lyra explained, gesturing for Jack to step forward. From here, you can access the station's primary systems. Jack approached the platform hesitantly, his gaze darting between the holograms. As he neared, the displays shifted, rearranging themselves into a pattern that felt oddly familiar. One of the panels lit up with a single word, command. What do I do? He asked, glancing back at the crew. Place your hand on the console, Lyra instructed. Jack hesitated. His mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if this was all some elaborate trap? What if touching the console fried his brain or activated a self-destruct sequence? But as he looked into Lyra's eyes, he saw no malice, only trust. Taking a deep breath, he reached out and pressed his hand against the glowing panel. The moment his skin made contact, a surge of energy shot through him. His vision blurred, and for a split second, he thought he might pass out. Then the sensation shifted. Awareness flooded his mind, expanding outward like a wave. He could feel the station, the hum of its systems, the subtle vibrations of its walls, the steady flow of energy coursing through its veins. It was overwhelming and exhilarating all at once. Jack gasped, pulling his hand back as the connection faded. What the hell was that? The first step of synchronization, Lyra said, her tone filled with quiet pride. The station is beginning to recognize you as its captain. Jack stared at his hand, still tingling from the experience. That was intense. It will become easier with time, Vega assured him. Jack shook his head, a small, incredulous laugh escaping his lips. This is insane. I can't believe this is happening. It is only the beginning, Captain, Lyra said, her golden eyes gleaming with anticipation. As Jack looked around the command center, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just been irrevocably changed. Whether he was ready for it or not, he was the captain now. And the station, his station, was counting on him. Jack Harper leaned back in the captain's chair, a surprisingly comfortable throne of organic material that seemed to mold itself to his body. He stared at the holographic displays surrounding him, their alien symbols constantly shifting and rearranging themselves into patterns he couldn't comprehend. Lyra stood beside him, her golden eyes calm and focused, while the rest of the crew worked quietly at their stations. So, Jack began, breaking the silence. Let me get this straight. This station, this living station, was built by some ancient alien civilization called the Arcturians, right? Correct, Lyra said, inclining her head slightly. And these Arcturians just disappeared one day. Poof. Gone. Approximately 3 millennia ago, Vega, the protocol specialist, confirmed without looking up from her console. Jack rubbed his temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache. And now I'm sitting here, in the captain's chair, because I bought this place for $1 on the internet. Does that about sum it up? Indeed, Lyra said, her tone as serene as ever. Jack let out a bitter laugh. Fantastic. My life was already a mess, and now I'm the captain of a haunted space station. Lyra tilted her head, her expression curious. Haunted? You know, Jack said, gesturing vaguely. Ancient aliens vanish without a trace, leaving behind super-advanced technology. Sounds like the setup for a horror movie. We assure you, Vega said, her voice laced with mild amusement. There are no spectral entities aboard the station. Good to know, Jack muttered, though the explanation did little to ease his unease. The station itself was incredible, and Jack couldn't deny the awe it inspired. It was vast, far larger than he had initially realized, with entire sectors dedicated to different functions. Living quarters, research labs, hydroponic gardens, engineering bays, and more. The crew had given him a whirlwind tour earlier, pointing out features like the advanced medical bay capable of regenerating tissue and a weapons system that could, in Lyra's words, neutralize threats with precision. But beneath the surface of all that wonder lay an unsettling question. What had happened to the Arcturians? Okay, Jack said, sitting up straighter in the chair. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Or, I guess, the alien in the room. What do we know about the Arcturians? Why did they build this station? And why did they disappear? The crew exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, it was Cassie, the navigation expert, who spoke. The Arcturians were one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, she said, her voice carrying a hint of reverence. They created vast networks of stations like this one, connected by interdimensional corridors. Their technology was so advanced that it often appeared indistinguishable from magic to less developed species. Jack raised an eyebrow. So they were basically the gods of space. In a sense, Lyra said. Their influence spanned countless star systems. They were scholars, engineers, explorers, but also deeply enigmatic. Even at the height of their civilization, much about them remained shrouded in mystery. And then they just vanished, Jack said, leaning forward. No warning, no signs. None, Vega said, her tone grim. One day, they were simply gone. Their ships, their cities, their people, everything disappeared. Jack frowned, the gears in his mind turning. But their stations were left behind. Correct, Lyra said. Many of them, like this one, entered a dormant state, awaiting new custodians. Jack snorted. Custodians. That's a fancy word for suckers who bought a space station for $1. Lyra smiled faintly. The station chose you, Jack Harper. That is not a coincidence. Jack didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at the holographic displays, watching as the alien symbols shifted and morphed into patterns he couldn't begin to understand. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than he was being told. What about the previous captains? He asked, breaking the silence. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier. The crew hesitated, their usually synchronized movements faltering for just a moment. They moved on, Nova, the security coordinator, said finally. Moved on. Jack repeated. As in, left? Or as in, died? That depends on your perspective, Vega said cryptically. Jack narrowed his eyes. That's not exactly reassuring. Lyra stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was warm, and there was a strange comfort in the gesture. The role of captain is demanding, she said. Not everyone is able to handle the responsibilities it entails. Jack laughed humorlessly. Great. So there's a chance I might get ejected into space if I screw this up. The station would not harm you, Lyra said firmly. If synchronization fails, it will simply return you to your origin point. And has that happened before? Jack asked, his gaze shifting between the crew. 3 times, Vega admitted. Awesome, Jack muttered, running a hand through his hair. So I'm basically the 4th-string quarterback for this place. Fantastic. Lyra's expression softened. You are not a replacement, Jack. You are unique. The station chose you because you possess qualities it values. Jack snorted. Yeah? Like what? Resilience, Lyra said simply. Jack blinked, caught off guard by the answer. He opened his mouth to respond but found he didn't know what to say. The conversation was interrupted by a low hum that resonated through the command center. Jack sat up straighter, his pulse quickening. What's that? Lyra turned toward one of the displays, her expression growing serious. A power fluctuation, she said. Is that bad? Jack asked, already bracing himself for the worst. It is a sign that the station is still stabilizing, Era said, her fingers flying across her console. Full synchronization with the captain is required to restore equilibrium. Jack groaned, slumping back in his chair. There's that word again. Synchronization. You keep saying it like it's the answer to everything. It is, Lyra said simply. Jack closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. Fine. Let's do it. Whatever this synchronization thing is, let's get it over with. The crew exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between them. Lyra stepped forward, extending her hand. It begins with touch, Captain. Jack hesitated, staring at her outstretched hand. You're not going to, download my brain or anything, are you? Lyra smiled faintly. Nothing so invasive. Trust me. Jack sighed and placed his hand in hers. The moment their skin touched, a jolt of energy shot through him, and his vision blurred. The room around him seemed to fade, replaced by a swirling void of light and sound. He gasped as awareness expanded outward, his senses connecting to something vast and incomprehensible. He could feel the station, the hum of its systems, the flow of energy through its corridors, the faint vibrations of its walls. It was overwhelming and exhilarating all at once. When the sensation faded, Jack found himself back in the command center, Lyra's hand still in his. He stared at her, wide-eyed. What the hell was that? He whispered. The first step of synchronization, Lyra said, her voice calm. The station is beginning to recognize you as its captain. Jack pulled his hand away, his mind racing. That was intense. It will become easier with time, Lyra assured him. Jack shook his head, laughing nervously. Easier. Right. But even as he tried to joke, he couldn't ignore the sense of connection he'd felt. For the first time, he began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he could do this. Jack Harper sat in the command chair, his hands gripping the armrests as he stared at the holographic displays around him. The swirling void of space loomed large through the viewport, an eternal reminder of just how far from Earth he truly was. The lingering hum of the station filled the silence like a distant heartbeat, steady but ominous. The crew stood at their stations, their movements smooth and synchronized as they worked. A tension lingered in the air, unspoken but palpable. Jack wasn't entirely sure what he was supposed to be doing as captain, but he'd been thrown into situations over his head before. Adapting had always been his strong suit, or at least his survival mechanism. Suddenly, a piercing alarm cut through the quiet. The station's lights flickered, bathing the room in alternating flashes of red and white. Jack bolted upright in his chair, his heart pounding. "What the hell is that?" he yelled, his voice cutting through the shrill noise. "An unidentified vessel is approaching," Nova, the security coordinator, reported. Her tone was calm, but her sharp movements betrayed her concern. Its energy signature indicates high probability of hostility. Jack blinked at her. Hostility? Like guns and explosions hostility. "Correct," Nova said, her vertical pupils narrowing as she focused on her console. Jack leaned forward in his chair, gripping the edges tightly. "Okay. What do we do about that?" Lyra stepped forward, her expression serene but serious. "The station is equipped with advanced defensive systems, Captain. We can activate them at your command." Jack's mind raced. "And if we don't?" "They will fire on us," Nova said bluntly. "And this station is not yet at full operational capacity." Jack's stomach twisted. "Great. So, what you're saying is we either fight or get blown to pieces." "That is the essence of the situation," Vega said, her voice steady as always. Jack groaned, running a hand through his hair. "Of course it is. Why wouldn't my first day as captain include a space battle?" The alarms blared again, louder this time. A holographic projection appeared before him, showing the incoming vessel. It was sleek and angular, its hull glowing faintly with an ominous red light. Jack didn't need to be an expert in alien technology to know it was bad news. "What do they want?" he asked, his voice rising with frustration. "Can we talk to them? Negotiate or something?" Lyra shook her head. Their energy signatures match those of raiders. They do not negotiate. They plunder and destroy. Jack stared at her, his chest tightening. And you're just now telling me this? We had no reason to assume raiders would locate this station so soon, Lyra said, her tone apologetic. Its reactivation must have drawn their attention. Jack slammed his hands on the armrests. Fantastic. So this is my fault too. Captain, Lyra said, her voice firm but not unkind, you must focus. You have the ability to protect this station. Trust yourself. Jack opened his mouth to argue but stopped himself. He could feel the crew's eyes on him, their trust unwavering despite the situation. The station hummed beneath him, as if it, too, was waiting for his command. For the first time in his life, Jack wasn't just surviving. He was responsible for something bigger than himself. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. Okay, let's do this. What are my options? Lyra stepped beside him, activating a holographic display that showed the station's defensive systems. We have energy shields to absorb their initial attacks and plasma cannons for counteroffense. However, the cannons require precise targeting to penetrate their hull. Jack nodded, his mind spinning. And who handles the targeting? You do, Vega said. The station's systems respond to your commands through synchronization. Of course they do, Jack muttered, gripping the armrests tighter. Okay, let's start with the shields. Bring them online. Era's hands flew across her console, and a faint golden shimmer appeared around the station. The alarms quieted slightly, though the tension in the room didn't ease. The shields are active, Era reported, but they will not hold indefinitely. Jack swallowed hard, staring at the approaching vessel on the holographic display. It was close now, its red glow growing brighter. A new alarm sounded, and Nova's voice cut through the noise. They've locked weapons on us. Jack's heart felt like it might burst out of his chest. Then let's not wait for them to make the first move. Fire the cannons. The cannons require your targeting input, Vega reminded him. Jack groaned. Right. Synchronization. Let's do this. Lyra stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. Close your eyes, Captain. Focus on the target. Let the station guide you. Jack hesitated, his mind screaming that this was insane. But there was no time to argue. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. The hum of the station grew louder in his mind, a steady rhythm that seemed to pulse through his veins. He could feel it, the energy coursing through the walls, the faint vibrations of the shields, the distant thrum of the plasma cannons waiting to fire. The image of the enemy vessel appeared in his mind, clear and sharp. Jack focused on it, imagining the cannons locking onto their target. He felt a strange connection, as if the station itself were responding to his thoughts. Fire, he whispered. The station obeyed. A surge of energy shot through the command center as the plasma cannons roared to life. Bright streaks of light exploded from the station, cutting through the void of space. Jack opened his eyes just in time to see the blast strike the enemy vessel, tearing through its hull in a brilliant flash. The raider's ship shuddered, its red glow flickering as pieces of its structure began to drift away. Another alarm blared, and Nova's voice rang out. They are retreating. Jack slumped back in his chair, his entire body trembling. We did it. Lyra nodded, her expression calm but proud. You did it, Captain. Jack let out a shaky laugh, his adrenaline finally starting to fade. Holy crap. I just won a space battle. The crew exchanged small smiles, their tension easing. Even Nova, usually stoic, seemed impressed. Jack looked around the command center, his gaze lingering on each of them. For the first time, he felt a sense of belonging, a strange but undeniable connection to the crew and the station. He straightened in his chair, a grin spreading across his face. All right, what's next? Over the following weeks, Jack settled into his role as captain. It wasn't easy, every day brought new challenges, from learning the station systems to navigating the crew's subtle dynamics. But Jack adapted, just as he always had. The crew grew closer, their initial formality giving way to a deeper camaraderie. Lyra's steady leadership, Vega's sharp intellect, Cass's quiet humor, Era's curiosity, and Nova's fierce loyalty became constants in Jack's new life. Together, they repaired the station, strengthened its defenses, and began to explore the mysteries left behind by the Arcturians. The question of the Arcturians' disappearance still lingered, an enigma Jack couldn't shake. But for now, the station was alive, thriving under his command. And so was he. One night, as Jack stood by the viewport, staring at the endless stars, Lyra joined him. She stood silently for a moment before speaking. "You've come a long way, Captain." Jack smiled, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. "Yeah, I guess I have." Lyra's golden eyes glimmered in the starlight. "You are exactly where you're meant to be." Jack didn't respond right away. He stared out at the stars, the weight of his new reality settling on his shoulders. He was a long way from Arizona, a long way from the life he'd once known. But for the first time, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Turning to Lyra, he grinned. "Well, let's keep it that way. We've got a space station to run." And as the station hummed softly around them, Jack Harper knew his adventure was just beginning.